a few ideas past you.
Really evaluate where your strengths and weaknesses are, and be honest.
Who are you?
I'm Peggy Olson, the new girl.
You are good with words.
We can say anything we want.
Well, gentlemen, I don't think I have to tell you what you just witnessed here.
Advertising is based on one thing: happiness.
Welcome to Mad Men, Men. I'm Jon Negroni. I'm the co-host of the Cinemaholics podcast. I'm also a film critic. And I have two gentlemen, Mad Men, here with me to talk about a TV show that changed my life, that is very important to me. And I'm about to find out what it means to them as we go on a crazy journey together to talk about what is one of the greatest TV series of all time, ushered in a whole era of prestige television, put AMC on the map, as one of these guys are wont to say. Let me introduce them. First, he's my co-host at Cinemaholics. He's also a writer for Collider.com. His name is Will Ashton. Hey, Will.
Hello.
Oh, Will, you're getting smoke into my eyes. Put that cigarette away.
I apologize. Let me put it out right now, and there you go.
This guy, he's known as the pitch bitch. He's always pitching. And I've known him for quite a long time now. He's a pop culture obsessive, one of the happiest human beings I've never met. But of course, I have met him. We used to live in the same town, and I miss him quite dearly. I haven't seen you in person in quite a while. Mike Overholse, otherwise known as Mike Overkill. Hey, Mike.
Hey, John. How's it going?
Mike, it's been too long since you and I saw each other like on any sort of like video, let alone in person.
It's true.
And I'm gonna say, I'm kind of digging the hair.
Oh, yeah, it's that pandemic grow out that just didn't go away.
It's just like coiffed in like just the right way. It's pretty attractive.
Yeah.
Anyway, we're talking about Mad Men. And the idea behind this is that we're going to be going episode by episode and kind of unpacking what the show really means to us. We're going to try deconstructing it. And here's the thing, though. We're all kind of coming to the show a little bit differently to some degree. I'll start by saying I've watched the show many times over. I've studied the show a lot. I've worked in advertising. This show is very important to me. I was watching it while it was airing. I'm quite obsessed with it. And Mike, what's your background with Mad Men? Are you mad about these men?
Oh, I'm so mad. So I have only seen the whole show once, and it was long enough ago that I went to go watch the episode, and I went to Netflix and was like, "Oh, Mad Men isn't here anymore." That's how long it's been.
Did you go to Amazon?
Yeah, I watched it at Prime with all the commercials, baby.
I own it on the Apple TV, so like I had the episodes downloaded, and so I wish I could share it with you all, but it's not as easy to log in, do all that fun stuff. Not that I would do such an illegal thing. Anyway, Will, you are a little different though. You've never really you haven't watched the whole show. You watched what, the first season?
Yeah, so about, I want to say like a decade ago, or maybe a little over a decade ago, probably around 2010, I dived into the show because obviously it was a big deal. I mean, even a teenager like myself at the time was like, I got to watch this Mad Men show. Everyone keeps talking about it. And I saw the first season, I dug it, but I knew it was a sort of show where I couldn't binge it, even though that wasn't quite, I think, a term quite yet in 2010. I knew I had to appreciate it like a fine wine or a fine whiskey. I had to kind of take it in and absorb it and contemplate it. And I really enjoyed the first season. I wanted to keep watching it, but at the time, my TV watching methods were not great unless it was a show like Breaking Bad, which I watched around the same time and just instantly got hooked with. And I watched that live, and I really got into that and the theories about that. So, I definitely appreciated Mad Men when I saw it, and I watched a little bit of season 2, albeit somewhat indirectly, but I never quite got the experience of catching up with it. And I wanted to, I just never had the opportunity. So I am thankful for this fledgling podcast that we have, that I'll finally have an excuse to go through the whole series, including rewatching the first season for what I think is the first time in a decade.
Yeah, I mean, what's interesting about that, because you bring up Breaking Bad. We were kind of talking about this before we started, but Breaking Bad and Mad Men are really the 1-2 punch that brought AMC to like what it is. They wouldn't do Walking Dead for a few more years. But Mad Men was their first original series, and it was their prestige drama, right? But Breaking Bad, that had like a whole fandom behind it, like had people, like you said, theorizing and stuff. Mad Men never had that though. It just had like a really solid fan base, and it has like really good memes. Like it's fondly remembered and still, talked about today.
But that was a show, though, where Mad Men, at least from my recollection of it, it became a sort of instantaneous hit. Like, as soon as it aired the first season, it was already accomplished, already well acclaimed, and people were only growing to like it more as it went along. Whereas Breaking Bad, even while it was having the same acclaim and getting Emmy recognition for the writing and for Bryan Cranston, I feel like it wasn't until it hit Netflix that people were binging the show and really getting into it.
Yeah.
So it was like that last season or last couple seasons where it really struck fire and became this cultural phenomenon. But I remember when I was watching it, it was very well liked, but I had to like kind of describe it for people because it wasn't that well known. But then my first year of college, like around 2011, that's when people were actually discovering the show, and they were like, "Oh yeah, the show you're telling us about, it's actually amazing." I was like, "I know,
you were right?
Yeah, you gotta watch it."
Will?
Yeah, right.
Well, that's
so
when
I don't know,
but that's around when Mad Men hit Netflix, right? Because that's when I started watching it. Was 2011,
right?
I feel like the first 4 seasons on Netflix, and then when the 5th season came out, I was like at that point already hooked.
But I feel like when Mad Men hit Netflix, it wasn't like it didn't become famous in the same way that Breaking Bad finally found its widespread recognition. I feel like it was like a wildfire when Breaking Bad hit Netflix, whereas Mad Men, it was already a big, huge hit and then became bigger because people could stream it. Is that accurate to say?
I guess it was a bit of a trickle. Is this around the time when you were watching it, Mike?
Yeah, no, I came late to it. I felt my issue with starting Mad Men was it felt like that show my parents liked at first. I'm a little bit of the baby of the group. I was only 12 when the show started airing.
Oh my gosh. Are you like allowed to be here?
I'm not. I'm not allowed to be drinking right now, but I am, baby. Let's go. But that's, Breaking Bad was cool, right? I was starting middle school. It was about drugs, right? It had a lot of appeal, I think, to a younger crowd. Whereas it was tougher to get into Mad Men first. You turn it on and you're like, all right, this guy works for an ad agency. That was tougher.
Where are the guns? Like, I think people were expecting Sopranos because this was Matthew Weiner, who had written and directed for The Sopranos and with David Chase, and then he went on to do Mad Men, his own thing.
Right. And actually the script for the teleplay, I guess, technically, for the Mad Men pilot was what got him the job on Sopranos, because he had this teleplay for a long time. I don't know exactly how long, but I know
it had a bit of a reputation. Yeah.
Right.
Like, and it was not a blacklisted screenplay, but it was one of those like TV pilots that like a lot of people talked about and were like, man, this has to get made. This would be incredible.
Or I thought it was like one of those things where it's like, you're never going to get this made because it's like too high budget for TV at the time, but it's so clear that you're talented, so we want to hire you for this show. Or at least that was the case for David Chase when he got hired for Sopranos.
I want to bring this up several times while we're going through the first season, but there are so many times in the first season where you can tell that they were trying to add in stuff to make it more accessible and mainstream. They do a little bit of it in this episode. So I do want to like put a little pin on that, put a little like bookmark, because it is like people say that the first season is the weakest season. I don't fully agree with that. I think it has really great moments. I think the second season is probably my least favorite, but that's to say, like, I love all of the seasons quite a bit. I think like once you get past the second season, it just gets better and better and better, and it never like loses steam, in my opinion, anyway.
Yeah.
But yeah,
it's just wild to me too that people say that about the first season, because even just the pilot alone, I would say of pilots I've seen, this is one of my favorite pilots of a show ever. It gives you so much about the characters. It sets so much up that's going to happen, not just later this season, but throughout the entire series. There's so much foreshadowing.
Ton of it. Like really good pointed dialogue. And there are some things that they kind of drop, like every time I rewatch the pilot, I'm just like, oh yeah, the switchboard operators. Like that never really turned into anything, even though they casted these people. Was
that
yeah,
because the actress that plays Flo was one of them, and she obviously got that big cushy gig, or
she got
was
a
that
little
separate?
progressive with
Christian Shaw, gone to Bob's Burgers.
Well, that too, yeah.
She was the Daily Show, I think at the time.
I feel bad for the third switchboard lady, because she might be famous in her own right. I don't know, but I feel like
we're not really giving her due.
Right. But I just feel like you see that, because I remembered the actress that plays Flo. I apologize, I don't remember her name off the top of my head, but I remembered she was one of the switchboard operators. But I forgot that Kristen Shaw was one too. So I was still kind of like, oh wow, when I was rewatching this pilot and seeing her again. But I felt bad for that third actress because like I'm sure she's probably a lovely lady, and I don't want to dismiss her talents, but it's like you just you just don't elicit the same reaction seeing you, unfortunately, as these other two well recognized actresses. But and maybe it's me speaking out of turn. I don't want to say.
The actress is Stephanie Courtney. I just looked it up. And yeah, because she started doing the commercials for Progressive literally in 2008. So Mad Men, I guess, was instrumental and it saw something in her, I guess. I don't know. But okay. So the first episode of Mad Men is called Smoke in Your Eyes, or Smoke Gets in Your Eyes. I always leave the gets out by accident. But you kind of touched on it already, Mike, how this episode of television is very much like it's like a short story, the way that it's structured. Like it has such a clear like beginning, middle, end. You can really like absorb it as like a little bit of like a mini sort of novel almost. And that's my favorite thing about it. Okay, so the episode actually starts with, we see Don from like behind, which I don't want to give stuff away because Will obviously hasn't seen the finale or anything. But I just will say to you, Will, like keep some of this stuff in mind of like the framing and like how they capture Will Draper. Yeah, I know you probably know some of what happens, huh? You don't have to give it away.
I mean, I know the last scene of the finale. Okay. I'm not gonna lie to you and say otherwise, but
it's hard to miss it, but we don't have to give it away for listeners.
I know like the one very meme-friendly moment with Peggy, and I know the ending of the finale, like the last scene. But those are the only two things I know about the finale of Mad Men at this.
We're gonna keep it all. We're gonna keep the rest of it a mystery, just like Don Draper himself, right?
But I mean, if I may, like one thing I really like about this opening shot, and I don't know if we mentioned this before when we were talking about The Sopranos, but Alan Taylor also did the pilot. He was a director of it, and obviously he was a big part of The Sopranos, including directing The Many Saints of Newark.
Also, Game of Thrones, and a lot of episodes of Game of Thrones, and also Thor: The Dark World, one of the better Marvel movies, right?
Yeah, not exactly. But I really like this opening shot where it kind of feels like, like there's like this sort of idealism about the 50s in the sense of like you're kind of like, people don't really have a accurate depiction of what the 50s is, and I like this opening shot kind of like gives you this sort of wistful look at the 50s, like everything you sort of expect outside of the black and white photography, and you kind of get that as it kind of zooms into like Don Draper, and he's like an eagle eye, like kind of trying to absorb it and trying to feel living in the moment, but with false pretenses, like he's doing it for advertisement purposes. And I really like that opening shot sort of establishes all that sort of information and gives you a firm idea about Jon Draper before you even know who Don Draper is. Is that fair to say?
I would say, except that I don't think, like, it tells you who Don Draper is, but it doesn't at the same time, which is why it's genius. I want to mention...
Well, it's advertising Don Draper in a way, right? Is that fair to say?
What do you mean?
Well, like it's like giving you like a false perception of who he is, and that's like his whole job is like giving a false perception of what life.
Well, yeah,
is.
Then that's one of the themes of the episode. Yes, I would say that because when we are zooming in on him, first of all, we skip the part where we have that famous text that comes up. This was Alan Taylor's idea, where it's kind of giving us the. I'm going to bring it up right now so I don't butcher it, but it's telling us like what is the inspiration, like what does Mad Men mean? It's the name of the show, and obviously. You could probably tell it's like a term related to an ad man in the 1960s. But specifically, as this text says, it's a term coined in the late 1950s to describe the advertising executives of Madison Avenue. They coined it. And
yeah, that's a great sentence. That I always love that part.
Yeah. But that's the thing is like some people kind of miss that Madison Avenue, Mad Men, that's the whole point. And one of the things that they touch on in this episode is the fact that, Sterling Cooper is known as an innovative ad agency, and it's known as an ad agency that, it's one of the like big Madison Avenue ones. And there's that whole plot about how there is this Jewish department store that wants to hire an ad agency that would be usually like known for Chanel or whatever, like one of these other brands, right? So fantastic, like efficient storytelling, just the opening scene itself.
It's just, and in the opening scene too, you get so much. It sets the tone for what that time period was, right? In that first minute, they hit you with racism, like pretty heavy-handed racism that your protagonist just waves away and doesn't care about. They hit you with
Well, it's trying to be sympathetic, isn't it? A little bit to him, or it's trying to make us. It's trying to make us think that Don Draper's not that bad by contrasting us with the boss of the waiter, Sam.
Sure.
Sam's the waiter, and then the boss is sort of like, "Hey, is he bothering you?" But then Don is like, "We're just having a conversation." And you're like, "Oh, Don's not that racist." But then later in the episode, Don is extremely racist. So I love that because that plays to the themes of the show, right?
And I love that what they're starting with is a cigarette ad, because in the modern age, even 2007, right? Like there is no bigger evil in the world than cigarettes. We grew up with so many commercials about how it's going to kill us. It's going to be so bad. It's drilled into our head that everybody lied to us about cigarettes. It's going to kill you. And how's the show start? How do we trick people into smoking more cigarettes?
Mm-hmm. It's like a weird problem that they have. Like we're rooting for characters who are literally like, there's a point in this episode where, Don is like looking up and thanking God for, that like inspiration to sell a cigarette ad. And then even Roger Sterling, played by John Slattery, is like, you should be looking down because it's right.
It
on.
reminds me, this pilot reminds me actually a lot, obviously, of Thank You for Smoking, which deals with a lot of similar things. But I mean, which obviously I think that was just more of a coincidental thing. Like we said, like this pilot was written well before that movie came out.
Didn't Thank You for Smoking come out? But didn't that come out after Mad Men, or do I have my years? Maybe I'm thinking of Burn After Reading.
Well, that's what I'm saying. No. I mean, the movie came out before, but I'm saying that the pilot was being written, I think, in the late 90s, early 2000s. So I think it was just a coincidence. I don't know when the book for Thank You for Smoking was written.
Me neither.
That was based on, but
know your cigarette media literacy, okay? Before you come onto this podcast.
Nobody knows cigarettes better than Mike. He's got some cigarettes right there.
They're actually in my travel case. It's just when I drink.
Yeah. So. No, it's a great opening scene, and I think that it gets across another thing too. Like we're talking about the duality of Don Draper. He's not exactly what he seems, down to the point where we see him from the back, and he seems confident, right? Especially if you're coming into this show sort of already knowing the myth of Don Draper. It's kind of fascinating to watch this and then see like he looks nervous and confused when we like swivel around, right? Because the whole like main dramatic question of this pilot is, will Don be able to keep the cigarette accounts? Will he be able to find a way to do an ad about smoking that gets around this problem where they can't say that it's healthy? And it's just, again, such a fascinating problem to have. But that's the thing. That's what's great about this pilot, is that it's all about character reversals and character surprises. Just characters doing things that you don't expect and you investing in them because they surprise you. That's my takeaway anyway. So, okay. The next scene, we meet Midge, who it's kind of fascinating because I don't want to give stuff away here. Midge is played by Rosemary DeWitt. And I think, though, Will, you might already have an impression that I get the impression that they intended for her to be a bigger character in the pilot than she ultimately ended up being. Just because like that's pretty like incredible casting. Like Rosemary DeWitt's pretty well known, right? But she's not in the show that much.
I mean, she's not a household name in a way that some other actors in the show have become. But yeah, I get what you mean. Like there was a time between 2011 and 2012 where she was basically in everything. And there's deservedly so, because I mean, she's a fantastic talent. But if you watch this pilot, as I did, I feel like I get that impression like, oh, she's going to be quite a big character, devoting the second scene of this pilot strictly to her, basically. And you're saying that is not the case moving forward?
I will not say either way, but it's. I mean, I'm trying to be as coy as I can and let you experience this show fresh. But it is something that did stick out to me. Of like, oh yeah, every time I watch this, I'm just like, Mitch. She's kind of this ingenue, right? Did that hit you too? Did you even remember her from the show, Mike?
I did. She's always that face I recognize in shows, but have no idea who she is. And she pops up.
Yeah, like United States of Terror.
Yeah, and she's also the first person you see Don Draper go to kind of like bounce the idea off of. I guess after this waiter, and you can tell that he drops his guard with and trust to talk about what is on his mind. Right? He's obviously in the time of need, and he's going to her to bounce these ideas off him. So it's giving you nothing but signals of this is an important person in Don's life. You might even think girlfriend, which makes the end of the episode just so good and hits you so hard.
Yeah, were you expecting that when you first watched the show? I mean, there are some people who say that it's not that great of a twist because there's so much foreshadowing to it. But I remember when I first watched it, I was like, oh my gosh, like I was not expecting him to have like a wife and kids, but I guess we'll get to that.
No, it definitely hit me. I was definitely shocked, especially the first time I watched it. Like, I knew January Jones was involved in the show. I didn't know who she was. I assumed she'd be another secretary.
Right. Yeah, I mean, for me, I felt like January Jones became one of the breakout stars of the show. So both times I've seen the pilot, I kept being like, when are they going to introduce January Jones? And both times I was kind of surprised that she's not really in the pilot until the last 5 or 3 minutes. So, and I mean, I don't know. I mean, I think she gets better at acting as she goes along. Like, I remember Last Man on Earth was the first time where I was just like, okay, she's really kind of getting the handle on the acting thing. And there's one episode in season 1 where I remember she holds her own, where she kind of gets like her chance to really get the spotlight.
That episode, I think, and the pilot, I feel like,
is it the one that Paul Feig directed?
I'd have to double check.
I remember it's one of the standout episodes of season 1.
I think it should. I mean, Shoot is one of the standout episodes, but yeah.
Yeah. But I remember in the pilot, it still felt like she was kind of figuring out the whole acting.
She's barely in it. I don't even think that was Kieran Shipka at the very end. They didn't have Alison Brie as Trudy yet. That's literally a picture.
Yeah,
of,
I was going to bring that up. That picture.
Matthew Weiner's mom.
He pulls it up, and I'm like, who the fuck is that woman? Like,
it's Matthew Weiner's mom. Yeah,
you can definitely tell it's a mom. I was like, that is not somebody, a 26-year-old.
Yeah, she's not in her early 20s. She's, yeah. I mean, she was, I guess, when she took that photo, but I didn't. But anyway, so that scene with Midge is really great just because I think that it gets a couple other things across, like the really sharp dialogue between like artists. Because like you said, Mike, like this is somebody that Don goes to because he's looking for creativity, and she brings that need to him, that need of like, him just sort of that side of him that is just like purely carnal and just kind of like a version of him that makes him feel kind of himself. It's something that we're going to explore a lot over the show, for sure. But another thing too is the dialogue here, where I wrote this down because it was one of my favorites in the whole episode, where he's like, we should get married. And she's like, you think I'd make a good ex-wife? And I don't want to give anything away to Will, but there are things that happen in this show that it's just like, it's wonderful foreshadowing. It's so great.
I mean, that reminds me of one of my favorite lines where they invited him before, but Pete was talking about the bachelor party, and Don Draper's just like, I forget the line exactly, but he's just like, I'll see you at the next one or something like that, like implying that he'll eventually get divorced. And it's a pretty good throwaway line. I like that. Yeah,
because it's even more specific to the idea of like what Don sees in women. And he sees Midge as like a creative counterpart, and how he seems to think that if he had that, he would be happy. And, not a spoiler alert, I guess, to say that might not be exactly what he thinks, right?
Yeah, I think this is actually just highlighting what you're going to see throughout the series of Don just continually not viewing other humans as like people, but people he can use. I feel like he compartmentalizes, okay, here is where you fit into my life, and I can use you like to further my career, further my ideas. And that's something you're going to see further in the series.
Well, not only that, but like being an advertisement man, he has to kind of block people off in these like idealized images in order to effectively do his job. Like he has to kind of remove the humanity in some people in order to effectively, compartmentalize what humanity is in that weird way. And that's something I find really fascinating.
See, where I differ is I don't think he's doing that. I think that he finds himself removed from other people. And I think that he has always been an observer from the outside, and he is kind of trying to have a learned understanding and use that to his advantage, which is why I don't think it's something that he does actively in order to be cruel to people. I think that that's just like a consequence.
But that's going to be the development of him.
Sure,
he doesn't know he's using them yet.
Right. That's what I was going to say.
Oh, totally.
Yeah. Right. I mean, I'm talking about like seeing the pilot itself from somewhat half fresh eyes. Like I know, you've seen the whole show and this development of his already, that's but true. Just watching the pilot, that's kind of my impression of him at this onset point.
Yeah, I think that's the pilot does what it sounds like. It's doing what it's supposed to do with you, Will, which is like, okay, I want to know more about this character, what makes him tick. For us, it's sort of like, okay, we've gotten a pretty comprehensive view of how he ticks after watching 7 seasons. But I've always found, I've watched this show at least 8 or 9 times consecutively before, and I never go through an episode and not catch something new about it, specifically about Don himself. There are so many layers here. This is a character that Matthew Weiner clearly just has like he just found a bit of a Pandora's box of a character, an intuitive character that just came alive for him. And it's one of the reasons the show is so rewatchable. So, okay. We get past the whole Midge thing, and we finally go to Sterling Cooper. And these next couple of scenes bring about again a very interesting direction for the show, which is here is our audience surrogate. Here is arguably one of the protagonists of the entire show. And that's Peggy Olson, who's played by Elisabeth Moss. This is before Handmaid's Tale. This is before a lot of big projects that she would do. Really put her on the map for sure. But Peggy Olson is the new girl. She is, I was waiting for, I was wondering if I should open the show with like, who's that girl? All that fun stuff. But no, she is kind of like a great character to sort of introduce us to, like, here's The Office, here's Joan Holloway. She's kind of the, the character doing all the exposition. And this scene is all about establishing really, like, because the stuff with Midge already did it a little bit, but really this is a man's world. I'm saying man's world in quotes. The misogyny of the show, which is one of, like, misogyny and racism are the two main things. But this is where the misogyny comes in, and it comes in with, like, through a lot of stuff in this episode.
And I think, like, her character is so key, at least in my opinion, of establishing why the show became so popular, because she's the audience surrogate, and she gives that opposite perspective that, there's that fear of, like, if you follow, like, this idea of, like, the morally gray protagonist, that's been prevalent from, going back to, I guess, Sopranos, even before that, where it's like, why do we feel a need to watch this character? Having someone that's counterpoint like Peggy be such a prevalent part of the pilot makes you like, okay, like, even though I don't always agree morally with what Dawn is doing, I can at least have some comfort in knowing, like, I can follow Peggy's perspective throughout this whole thing.
Right. And I also love the quote after the scene in the elevator, right? I wrote down, you got to let them know what kind of guy you are so they'll know what kind of girl to be. And that it just gives you the ick, right? It just makes you feel so gross, but he gets no pushback. Everybody's like, yep, exactly. And it doesn't even seem like Peggy, through her actions in the entire first episode. You're like, okay, that's the acceptance of the world, right?
Yeah. Well, I just think, like, a lesser show would have made Pete the audience surrogate, and Pete just sucks. Like, I'm sorry, I don't know if he gets better as this goes along, but Pete is just
this is what I'm going to tell you about. This is what I'm going to tell you, Will Ashton. What this show is going to do to you with Pete is make you realize you're Pete Campbell. Get ready.
But is that fair to say, though? I mean, like
You're
I said,
Pete.
but like
I'm Pete too.
Yeah.
Even Mike's Pete.
Sure.
Better looking.
Yeah, but I just mean that, like, a lesser show would have probably focused on him, like the young upstart who's just trying to make his way into this world. But spending more time ultimately with Peggy as opposed to Pete really shows, I think, why the show became so prevalent.
Or they would have done the Mary Tyler Moore thing where it's about Peggy sort of being like, I'm going to change the office, instead of being a little bit more of that grounded, realistic, like, no, okay, this is 1960, not 1970. We're going to get to the 70s eventually in Mad Men, but it's going to take a while, and it's going to go through, like, here is a flaw I do find with this episode. And I don't know what you two are going to think, but this involves the era itself. And one thing that I think the first season is so annoying about in a few of the episodes, but this one in particular, which is it halts everything to be like, by the way, it's the 1960s. Did you know that this is the 1960s? Look at this typewriter. They're literally writing dialogue in this, and it's mismatched to me because it's like it's so obviously in there to provoke a response, to be like, they think a typewriter is a lot of technology. Like, even Peggy is just sort of like, they made it so that a woman can understand. Oh, I hope so. Like, I'm like, okay, like that's when it starts to get cartoonish.
And I felt some of it actually was confusing to me. As far as the technology, at the end of the episode, when Dawn says, if only there was a magic machine, or it's not like there's a magic machine that can copy these pages. I literally was like,
it makes identical copies.
I was like, is he being sarcastic, or is that like, has the copy machine not been invented yet?
I don't think there are copy machines yet, or Xeroxes. I think that's coming, but I think that is the joke, because this is the era when, like, movies weren't made. Like animated movies, they were still, like, doing it by hand and, like, using, like, pastels and then cells and all that stuff. So yeah, it's pretty weird. It's pretty weird. Also, Joan Holloway in this, played by Christina Hendricks, the wonderful Christina Hendricks, and who I think goes on to be one of the best characters. In this character, she is a monster. Like, literally the whole bag over her head speech I'm watching that. I'm just like, every time I'm just like, I don't remember Joan being this like sadistic, like, but I get it. Like it's a function of her character. It does make sense. And I'm so excited to talk about Joan a lot over the show, because her and Peggy are two characters who go on very specific paths. And the contrast between them, I think, is so fascinating. There's an episode way late in the show I cannot wait to get to that really gets to the heart of like what makes them different, but also like how they experience the same hardships. So there's definitely a lot of in this episode about like, okay, she's a secretary, but Joan is sort of like, well, if you're really going to be successful, you're going to get married and go out to the country. But you can kind of tell that Peggy's a little bit resistant to that, or you kind of get this little twinkle in her eye that maybe she wants something a little different. We then meet Pete Campbell. He comes into the show and he kind of like, I don't want to skip over this part, but Don and Roger kind of make their best bud introduction there. Roger, who I think they didn't intend for him to be one of the main characters, but which is weird too, because every time I see this first episode, I'm like, did they not? Because he really comes to life. He's one of, I think, the linchpins of the entire show.
He's my favorite character of the entire series.
Right.
I love him so much.
His dialogue's amazing, and it's good. Like, I don't know, I've heard some people say like, well, the first season, first episode, it's like, I don't really know. Roger hasn't really come together yet. I'm like, this is pretty standard Roger. He's pretty like, he has a lot of great dialogue in this. John Slattery just destroys this role. I think he takes something that was probably underwritten and like really delivers so well. He kind of has like a nice little like big brother sort of component for Don. But also, like, he kind of sees through Don's, like, Don's trying to put on this facade of, like, I'm ready. The Lucky Strike account's fine. I'll figure it out. And he's just like, even little Q is like, oh, you're missing a button. Because, like, Roger just knows him at this point. So that was fun to point out. But anyway, so then we do get to Pete Campbell, who meets Peggy, too. And he kind of comes into the office and just starts just, like, being relentlessly cruel to her. But then Don sticks up for her, which, I don't know, this Don and Pete stuff. I don't want to say too much, obviously, because we are going to see more of that over the next season. But can I say it's probably my least favorite thing in the episode? Like, it comes off very weird to me. There's this whole thing where like Pete wants his job, right? And I don't know. It felt a little bit like overwritten. I
think it goes back to your, hey, it's the 60s kind of thing where it was like the climbing the ladder in the corporate world was all you were focused on, right? I don't think I've ever walked up to somebody at work that was in a level above me and went, yeah, it's no secret, I want your job.
It was more subtle earlier when Don is like, there's this kid who comes to my office and looks where he wants his plants.
Exactly,
like,
that's good writing. And then they just shoehorn this in of like, okay, watch these two throughout the show. I think that's, qualms of a pilot, right? They have to make sure you get it.
Will, why is Pete your favorite character? Is it because he reminds you of you?
Don't be putting words in my mouth there, John. I generally agree, I think, with what Mike is saying, which is it doesn't bother me as much because it just feels very much like we are the pilot of the show and we kind of need to establish these things because we're the first episode. And I mean, maybe that's just me putting my blinders on because I know the show progresses as it goes past this point. But yeah, I mean, watching this, that scene you're referring to where it's just like they have this weird, like, not quite brotherly relationship, not quite father and son relationship, but not quite colleagues relationship. And it's just like, this is the very scripted moment where we have to establish character dynamics. And it's like, I get it. It serves its point. It's not poor because the acting and the direction pulls it off. But at the same time, it's not the scene I reflect on and be like, yes, this is Mad Men at its peak.
Yeah, it's the past versus the future. But at the same time, it's kind of weird, isn't it? Because Will, I have a question for you. How old do you think Don Draper is in this episode? And there is a canonical answer. I'm
going to guess somewhere between 38 and 42.
He's 35.
Okay. Yeah, it makes sense.
It's weird, right? Because it's like Jon Hamm doesn't look 35. Like he looks like he's always around 40, but in a very handsome way, I guess. Is that weird?
I mean, he's always had that old fashioned look to him, right? And I felt like this show was just like the right thing at the right time for him. But I mean, Jon Hamm as actor is such a sort of fascinating conundrum because he is your kind of classic example of a character actor born in a leading man's body. Is that fair to say?
I think it's fair to say. I think that he was born to play this role. That's for sure.
Well, I just mean that, like, he never really found the fame until the show, I think, because he was pursuing more of a comedy career before this. And it was one of those things where he just never quite found his niche, because I think he was trying to play these sort of goofy, like almost bro-y frat roles that just sort of eluded him, because a lot of Hollywood producers just like, you're just too handsome for what you're trying to do.
Yeah. He's trying to be
And when he
Bradley
finally gets a
Cooper
role,
before there was Bradley Cooper. I mean, he does pull it
Yeah,
off
exactly.
in Bridesmaids.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not saying he's an unfunny guy. I'm just saying that I think what he was trying to do before this was not playing to his strengths, I guess, or that he was trying to avoid what he ultimately was bound to do, which is a sort of role like this where he is perfectly cast, but sort of playing against what he was pursuing the acting career for. And you see a lot of the roles past Mad Men, he's trying to go for comedy, like you said, with even during the show, he's trying to do like a Bridesmaid supporting role, and then like after this he's doing like the Wet Hot American Summer spin-off show and like all these other comedic things, and they're, you know, some of them work, some of them don't, but it just seems like he's a, like I said, a traditional dramatic leading man actor who just wants to do the standout supporting role actor. Like I think in his mind the role he would love to play is like Philip Seymour Hoffman in Along Came Polly, and he just can't play that because he's just too damn handsome for that.
I'll jump on two things. I just want to take offense for Philip Seymour Hoffman, R.I.P. for you basically calling him ugly. No.
No, I'm not.
You said it.
No, I'm not saying he's ugly. No, I didn't say he was. I never said
he's
he was
just saying
ugly.
that
You're putting words in my mouth.
He's just saying that Philip Seymour Hoffman isn't handsome enough for him. That's all.
I also, Mr. Negroni.
No, I'm saying Philip Seymour Hoffman. Yeah, okay, go ahead.
I'm glad you brought up Wet Hot American Summer too, because I will not stand for Bradley Cooper erasure saying he's trying to beat Bradley Cooper before Bradley Cooper. Bradley Cooper is in Wet Hot American Summer, which predates the original.
That's true. I was thinking of Wedding Crashers more, and I wasn't pulling to Bridesmaids, but sure.
I'm here to keep you straight, man. Okay.
I appreciate it. I need that. You know, you're as advertised, Mike. There's also a scene that I kind of skipped over, but we kind of have one of our first very I call them Weinerisms, where it's kind of like a more surreal dream sequence. And it's not even really a dream sequence. It's literally just Don sort of on his couch looking up at a fly trapped in a fluorescent light. Gee, I wonder what that represents. It's pretty on the nose, and it's Weiner does it much better later, especially because like he even layers in like kind of what I was referring to, where it's like the bombs exploding in the background. It's like, okay, like it's pretty lame.
The funny thing for me is like when I see that scene, I'm like, oh, this is actually Fly before Fly became a thing in Breaking Bad.
I think what's most interesting about it is that you can kind of see how Weiner's trying to like take, and I actually haven't read the original screenplay, so it might have been in there originally, but I do think that he's taking some of his more surreal like storytelling approaches, which I think are some of my favorite, you know, quirks of his writing, and trying to mix them with like some of these mandates I think he was getting from AMC, where it was like, okay, we need this mysterious backstory for Don. You need to throw in the Purple Heart. You need to, you know, do all this extra stuff, and it's like, you don't need it. Like one of the things that like is appealing for me about Don Draper is the mystery aspect. It is that he's an anti-hero, and unpacking that stuff in a more elegant way, I think, is way more important than trying to like scintillate the viewer and be like, don't worry, we're going to like do all of this crazy dramatic stuff. Like none of that is necessary in my opinion. But
I hated that Purple Heart scene because I hate the fact that he closes it and it has to show us, oh, it says Don Draper on it. Who looks at a Purple Heart in their private office that isn't theirs?
Well, we wouldn't know. We don't have Purple Hearts, to be fair. Maybe we
have a Purple Heart, not like the military one. Okay. It's a medical condition. It's because I smoked too many Lucky Strikes.
But you don't. Yeah, you did. You don't look at it in your office. You're right. Okay, so this next scene, we have Peggy showing up in this like doctor's office. I don't think this is the next scene, but it's one of the next scenes. And super uncomfortable doctor's appointment, where he's basically like, again, it's more of like, look, it's the 60s, doctor smoking a cigarette in the office, being extremely like unprofessional and being like, well, you don't want to be the town pump, do you? Like, it's just so relentless.
It reminded me, I mean, we just saw Call Jane at Sundance, you and I, John, and it kind of reminded me seeing that scene in that film. I know that wasn't the 50s or 60s, I think, but it did call back to that scene, at least. That scene's in
the 70s, yeah, and it is kind of funny, isn't it? I think it was the 70s. I could be wrong about that, but yeah. And then we also move on to our first Mad Men like client meeting. It starts off super smooth. Where because we already glossed over a little bit how they're going to be meeting with a Jewish client played by Maggie Siff. Her name is Rachel Menken, and she owns a department store with her father. And she's Jewish, and so Roger, his harebrained scheme is like, we need to find somebody who works here who's Jewish. And I think that this is one of those immediate, like, Don is actually like, he is a product of the time too. Like, he's not some sort of like racially progressive, or like he's not a feminist. He's none of this stuff. He immediately is like, are there any Jews who work here? Is like, not on my watch. And you're just like, oh, okay. Like, he is racist. It's just like there was a little bit of a glimmer of like him not being racist to get the audience to kind of like him and sympathize with him in that first scene. But you can also reread that scene as like he's trying to get something from the black waiter, so he may not be like racist in a traditionally prejudiced way where he's like, I wouldn't even talk to it. No, it's more of like he just sees people as people to use, and he doesn't, it's a different, type of racism. And so you clearly see it when he is being extremely like uncool, not great. He's having a bit of a gamer moment when Jewish people get brought up. But yeah.
Yeah, I mean, well, it's a 1-2 punch of he's racist and sexist because it's a Jewish woman, and he just, feels undermined and also feels that he is, you're right, yeah. It's very clean pilot writing.
I also love the way the scene reads, right? Because he makes the mistake, so it's misogynistic. And then as the viewer, you're assuming, oh, Don, you're like so classist as well that like you don't even recognize the artist. And then it's not until after you get the little aside from John Slattery and you realize, oh, that's the Jew that John picked to come into the room. So that's why Don didn't recognize him.
Yes. Yeah, because you're just like, oh, he doesn't know his employees. Now, he does have that meeting with Sal earlier in the episode where, we get our Sal scene. And the show just, again, the show gets so much better at this later. And I know I'm kind of picking the pilot apart. It's because I've seen it so many times that like I've praised it so many times that I want to be a little bit negative, I guess. But the Sal stuff, it's like how many times do you need to like make it clear, like especially in like the later scene in the slipper room or whatever, the automat, where it's like, we get it. Like, Sal's a closeted homosexual in New York, and like they.
Oh, I wanted to.
Yeah.
I actually wanted to bring this up only because, for whatever reason, my recollection of this scene, like Sal, of all like of Don's lackeys, like he gets the most attention as pilot. Like Harry and the other guys don't really get developed until later. But in this, for some reason, in my mind, like the Sal being a closeted gay man was a lot more subtle in my mindset. But in this pilot, it's like it couldn't be more apparent rewatching. It's just like he's very obviously a gay man trying to adapt himself into a straight working environment. And the pilot seems to go out of his way basically every time he's on screen to be like, he is gay. Don't forget he's gay. Hey, did you know actually he's actually a gay man?
Again, and I don't think it's because they're trying to be true to the era. I think it's because they think the audience is dumb. And they want the audience to have that sort of shoehorn drama.
I don't think it's an issue of like them being like stuck in the 1960s or like pilot writing. I think it's an issue of 2007. I think, like, we're still getting now pronounce you Chuck and Larry in that era, right? There's a lot of gay media that's not great.
Well, yeah, I mean, to the pilot's credit, and maybe this is false to say, but I don't get the sense that they're judging him because he's gay. Like, it's just more like they're trying to plant the seed. Like, it's something, like, it doesn't feel like unprogressive that he is gay, but rather just like, this is something you need to know about him going forward, to the point where we're going to develop his character more than the other advertising guys outside of Pete and Don and Roger.
And there's the line when Don is getting the report from the woman, and it's so good of him saying, so you're telling me people are living one way and thinking the exact opposite? That's ridiculous.
Yeah. I think that, like, especially because it's not even like the whole thing where he trashes psychology. Like, psychology and advertising went hand in hand, like, for a long time, way before the 60s. So it is kind of interesting that, like, even for his time, Don thinks himself like a modern man. He thinks himself this like metropolitan, whatever, cosmopolitan genius, and he is a genius in the show. But for sure, like, there is that obvious disconnect of like, there's just a lack of self-awareness, and it's one of the first hints that like, this is not a character that you're watching because you think he has it all together. He clearly lacks like this self-actualization that it seems like an impossible obstacle. It might take 7 seasons for Don to self-actualize. I hope you
But then the pilot does kind of back him up, though. I mean, I'm jumping to it, when Pete uses the research, and he says, if it was good, I would have used it, right?
But you know why? Because he's not selling to Lee Garner Jr. He's selling to the dad. He's selling to the older man. And it's of course he's going to sell that idea to the same stuck in their head generation, because that's another thing of like cigarette advertising did lean on and be extremely successful from that research, from that whole idea of like smoking is cool. Like smoking is cool, and even though it's dangerous, it's something that echoed like into our like upbringings. I remember stuff like that, not on TV, but I think like you could see it on like billboards or whatever.
You heard it here first.
Oh, I mean, the classic Joe Camel. I remember that as a kindergartner. Like they had to be like, we can't sell a scavenger hunt for our cigarette company because kids will want to indulge in this. So
they made a cartoon camel you just couldn't say no to.
Yeah, a bit of a faux pas for the ad industry. Yeah,
to do drugs.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Well, smoke cigarettes. To be clear.
Yes. So they have the meeting with Rachel Menken, and part of the reason Don really fails this entire interaction is he's super nervous about the Lucky Strike meeting because he has nothing, and it's coming up, and he just doesn't care about this. Like we already established, like he's racist. Like he doesn't take the client seriously, and he has some really great. The first line that Matthew Weiner wrote for the script is in this scene, which I'm going to butcher it, but it's something along the lines of like, I'm not going to let a woman speak to me this way. This meeting is over, essentially. That was the first thing that Matthew Weiner wrote. And it speaks a lot to one of the running themes of the show, which is Don sort of trying to get past his masculine insecurities. I think that's how Matthew Weiner said that in an interview once. I think that's how he characterizes the journey of Don Draper, is this guy who just does not believe in himself, and he just believes in this like image, this advertising image of what a man is, because he had to learn it. He had to acquire it through like, pretending to be somebody, as we'll find out over, like who he really is and all that stuff. And this scene really nails that through him handling the situation so poorly. It's a great scene, especially because Rachel Menken is completely right. And like they can't handle it. She's like a coupon. Oh my gosh, it's fantastic.
Housewives, they love those coupons. Housewives and housemites.
Yeah, I was curious too what you thought, Will, of the Rachel Menken scene, like, because what were you picking up on, like, in terms of like, did you think that this was like a character that was going to come up again, or did you think like, were you surprised that she comes back at the end of the episode?
Well, my first initial thought was, is that Haley Atwell? I don't know. I kept thinking that was Haley Atwell for some reason, but no, I mean, I was really impressed by Maggie Sis' performance. I was trying to remember what else has she been in? I couldn't remember exactly.
Sons of Anarchy. That's like one of the biggest. Yeah.
I feel like I've seen her something else because I have not watched Sons of Anarchy, to be clear. But I was really taken by her performance and her character, and I am excited, hopefully, to see her in future episodes of this show.
Sounds good to me.
Will, I think you might be on luck, pal.
No, we're not giving anything away.
She said she'd be in Monday morning. That's not giving it away.
Yeah, we'll see her on Monday morning. Yeah. Next time we talk will be Monday. Anyway, so they have this meeting, doesn't go well as we established, and we get a little bit more of the interaction between Don and Pete, which this is. I know I was kind of complaining earlier, but like Pete really sells that line, or like that, not the line, I guess, but like the entire motion of like he basically extends a hand out to Don. And he's like, I'd follow you into combat blindfold. It's so cringe. But like, there's literally like the composition of it where there's like a blue light behind them. You just really see their silhouettes. You see the hand raised, but there's a divider like right in between them. And then Don is literally, I don't want to wake up pregnant. Let's take it a little slower. I don't want to wake up pregnant. And it's just, it's beautiful. It's beautiful. And then Pete, of course, walks away. And like, this is something that I never picked up on before. Again, like I always get something new out of the show. Pete doesn't just say like, fuck you. He looks around first because he's a sniveling coward, and we're all Pete Campbell, but he looks around and then he feels comfortable enough to drop the, clearly it's for himself. I really dug the scene.
That scene really, I also caught the look around, and that's the first time I really was like, oh, Pete, there's a bit of Randall from Monsters Inc. in Pete here. He's a product of the people around him and their perceptions of him.
Well, I mean, since we brought up the whole Pixar thing, I was just going to mention off the cuff here that I feel like this whole movie is basically Brad Bird's wet dream, and the only thing that could make it more of his wet dream is if there was a robot walking around the office. So I just wanted to say that at some point in this episode. So there you go.
You got it off your chest. All right. Well, the next scene is it's fascinating. We're about halfway through the episode, and this is the climax of the episode, arguably. It's kind of interesting because it's structured in a way where like the whole episode's been leading up to this, but we still have like half the episode to go when they finally have the infamous Lucky Strike scene. And a lot of things happen here. The first big Don speech, something that the show becomes known for. The first time I really like engaged with the show was when I was in college for advertising, because they would show this scene along with a couple others from the first season. Because around the time the show was airing, again, it was like hitting Netflix, and that's when I started watching it for sure. But specifically, this is the scene where Don has one of the most memorable speeches yet, one of the most memorable taglines too. But before that happens, he's floundering. He is failing miserably to basically like I've been in this situation before where you're in a meeting and you're supposed to deliver something, and for whatever reason, I have nothing. Like I've been in an advertising, I've been in a pitch meeting where like somebody's expecting something, and like if this happens, it's because I realize my idea won't work, or they say something that's just like, but it's not like we're going to do this thing that I have just prepared for. And I've had to completely improvise on the spot. And I don't know how you two read Don in this scene, but for me, it's empathy, because I'm like, oh, I've been there. It's the worst feeling, like when you're on the spot and it's just like, you're trying to stall and you're like, I'm a Lucky Strike man from way back. I was having a little bit of some trauma. I was hearing bombs exploding is what I'm trying to tell you guys.
That's interesting. I feel like, especially the first time I watched it, a little bit the same thing this time, but I felt disappointed in Don, right? Because you come in, especially for me watching it live, with this, Don Draper's a hero, right? Don Draper's a legend. It's been set up in the episode. Pete's going to follow him blindly.
You see the awards on his wall.
Right. And you're like, okay, he's going to come up with something, and he doesn't. And and you're a little embarrassed for him. But then he comes up with the idea, right? And I felt a lot like Junior, where John Slattery goes, gentlemen, I think we all know what just happened here. And I felt just like him, like, do we? Like, what was so great about what he just said?
That's the thing. He brings it home with the happiness speech. Now, before that happens, Pete Campbell kind of swoops in and does the research idea, which we know, that's the thing. It's like when you rewatch it, especially, you're just like, oh yeah, like it's not that idea doesn't work. It's that the client isn't always right. And that's not what the client needs to hear. Like you even see Lee Garner Jr. is sort of like, that's interesting. But then the dad is just like, we're going to tell them that cigarettes are dangerous. And that's a problem. It's that they're not ready to recognize that, yeah, that ship has sailed. Like you can't keep denying that like cigarettes are dangerous, which is all like the point of that research that people know, but they don't care. Instead, Don is trying to go for this whole thing instead, where it's just like, just ignore the problem and be happy with your product. And that to me is the beauty of the pitch. It's not that the pitch is good, it's that it's well executed. I think that's what it's trying to do. What do you think, Will?
I feel like this scene is what I call Don Draper's House moment, where if you remember the Fox TV show House, where Hugh Laurie played Dr. House, and you watched the pilot of that show if you watched it, and you're like...
Thankfully, Mad Men doesn't abuse this like House does.
No, I know. I know to the point where House, it basically became a joke where he would just be like, I'm this toxic male character who is, basically half abusing my staff and doing this bad stuff. But then at the end of the episode, I have the perfect cure and I figured this all out. And I basically knew this the whole time, but I didn't want to reveal my hand. I don't think the Mad Men falls for the same traps. I think that's part of the reason why the show became so famous and so popular. But I did feel a lot like I did when I watched the pilot for House, where it's just like, can we really trust this Don Draper guy? They keep hyping him up, but I don't know. He seems like he's flailing a bit. But wait, he's got an idea. What's this? He's going to the chalkboard. That means, can I trust this guy? Yeah, exactly. And then it's like, oh man, it's toasted. You know what? This guy might have what it takes.
Maybe it is toasted.
John, have you ever been in a meeting where you had to ask your client, how is your product made? Tell me.
No, I've asked questions about like processes, and it is something that like when you can have like those sorts of like frank conversations. It's not something that struck me as sort of like, who would ask that? But I do think it's funny that like one guy didn't even know. It's like, shame on you.
I was going to ask you if you're going to have a moment where you came to the chalkboard and wrote "It's toasted," and the people are like, "We're selling baby food. What are you talking about?"
Oh man, the average, that is one of the gateway pleasures of the show. It's like one of the things that people get into the show for, because they don't know like the layers underneath, but they're just like, a show about advertising. A lot of people find that world interesting. If you work in advertising, if you are sort of that person who, is interested in that, because especially like in today's day and age, there are so many like gig economy workers, or so many people who have to do advertising and marketing on their own budgets. And, Mad Men is one of those shows that people refer to when it comes to like creativity and like, oh, if you want to be good at marketing, watch Mad Men. And I've always rejected that because I don't think the show is about that at all. But what it's about is sort of how advertising is used. It's not about advertising. It's just about the parallels between how some people approach it and how other people do, and what that has to do with us as human beings, why advertising is a thing in the first place. And that's what I love about this whole scene, is the stark difference between how somebody like Pete Campbell thinks that you should pitch advertising, which is, it's this sort of thing where you have to like get into people's heads and just try to get them to affect them and change them to get them to do something. Whereas Don's approach is, no, Don is a storyteller. He's a creative writer. He's somebody who understands that in order to get somebody to buy something as he sees it, the ad man has to create an emotional connection between the person and the product. And then we have that speech later in the episode between him and Rachel about this. But I think that's it. Like, that is the baseline of who Don is and how he sees advertising. He wants that emotional connection with people. He can do that with advertising, but he struggles to do that in real life. That's the show. We do it in the pilot. It's great.
That's why
now we know what the show is going to be about.
That's why it's one of the greatest pilots. It really gives you that strong undertone of, it sets it up completely for what's this arc going to be the entire series.
Yep, for sure. And then I want to reiterate, when Don is just like, I pulled that out of thin air. Like, thank you up there. And then Roger's just like, you're looking in the wrong direction. Because the show reminds you, it's just like you're feeling good about Don basically selling death sticks, and it's pretty messed up. So then next up we still have a bunch of the episode to go. It is kind of interesting how it's structured that way, and it really works because there's the resolution of like, no, that this isn't the point of the episode. It's a reversal. It's like, you think the dramatic question of the whole thing is, will Don save the Lucky Strike account? But that's not what it is. The real question is going to be, are these people going to find a connection at the end of this long workday? And so with Don, we see that played out through this dinner he had, or this drink he has with Rachel. With Pete, he goes to the automat, and with Peggy, she's hanging out, listening to records in her room, which I found that more relatable. But so we have the conversation between Don and Pete, where Don has like basically picked up like, hey, like, I know you looked at the research in my trash can, and he kind of argues for himself and all of that good stuff. I did want to mention too, because Ken Cosgrove, who I don't even know, Will, if you remember him by name in this episode, but he's one of the like bachelor party guys. He's a bit of I never get over this, Mike, how he changes so much over the course of the show, right? Because in this episode, he puts it on. He's basically what Harry Crane becomes, right?
I'm literally just now realizing what you're meaning. Like, I watched that entire first episode and didn't even connect that that's who he becomes, because it's so different.
Right. And then Harry is the other way. And it's something that it's like, it's fascinating. The more I watch the show and see like what they're doing with those characters, I do wonder, it's like, how much of it is intentional? How much of it happened organically? And that's something that I'm going to be paying attention to over the rest of the first season, is what is it about Ken? Because I remember some stuff from the first season that does establish that there is more to him than this pilot sort of suggests, because I think, especially for you, Will, since you're coming into it way more fresh, I don't know how much you remember of the ad guys, but it is kind of interesting how they kind of are just the same person several times, right? Like, did any stick out to you?
I mean, Sal's the only one that really besides Pete, obviously. Sal's the only one that really stands out in this pilot to me. But I know Harry becomes a bigger part of the show. I don't remember the other characters' names particularly well at this point because it's been a decade. But Yeah, I mean, those are the only ones that really stand out to me at this point.
There's a bit of,
Paul.
the Grease, John Travolta's buddies in Grease kind of effect on the ad guys in this episode. There's their, just to go, ah!
Yeah, because these guys, they're all in their mid-20s, and that, even Don makes the crack about them being like fraternity guys. And he looks down on them quite a bit, especially because Don's somebody who, as we find out, didn't go to college. Okay, so then Peggy throws herself at Don. I hate this. It's so like I get it, it functions, but I just hate seeing it because it's not Peggy, but I get it. Like, this is Peggy at this point. She thinks that this is what she's supposed to do. And I'm curious though, Will, what you thought of this scene in particular, since you don't have as much context.
I mean, I found it less interesting than the scene where she is with Dawn, a few scenes prior, where she kind of, tries to like kind of form something because she feels like that's what she's supposed to do. Oh, I'm sorry. I thought you were talking about the one with Pete later on.
I was saying she throws herself at Dawn. She doesn't throw herself at Pete.
Sorry.
Pete throws himself at Peggy.
Sorry, I was mixing it up. No, I mean, I think the scene's kind of fascinating because it's one of those scenes where, like you said, like it kind of establishes the complexity of Dawn as a character, because you could have, obviously had a scene where Dawn kind of indulges this fantasy or, kind of indulges Peggy in what she's trying to do, but he's clearly more mature and more thoughtful about this. And he, recognized also that, Peggy's a pretty young, impressionable woman. He just basically puts her down. But obviously, like we said before, he is establishing this sort of sexist mentality where he's putting her down sort of gently, but also using kind of harsh language at the same time. And sort of this, like, it's a harsh, brutal scene. Yeah, it's a harsh, brutal scene, but he's also kind of being gentle with her at the same time. It feels very resonant for that.
I think it's really interesting that your focus on that scene is Dawn, because I watch it and I'm thinking just of Peggy. I think it shows how hungry she is, how quick of a learner she is of understanding this is what I need to do to succeed and going for it on day one, which becomes is just so paramount to Peggy's character.
And Elisabeth Moss' performance in the scene, I think, is incredible, to be sure. Absolutely.
All right. All fair enough. We go to the automats, and Pete and the boys are at this, it's called like the slipper room or whatever. It's this bachelor party. And I think really the function of this is, once again, okay, Sal is like, I'm gay, but nobody knows, and all of that. There is a funny line of dialogue there where she's like, I love this place. It's loud and full of men. And he's like, I know exactly what you mean. And like, we get it. like really, like they linger on it. It's ridiculous.
Wait, are you telling me that he's gay?
Sorry, I don't want to blow your mind with spoilers. Salvatore. Then of course Pete gets a little bit too handsy with somebody, and he's just a dweeb. I mean, he's just kind of like, he's ruined everybody's buzz. He's desperate. We already mentioned that, he's getting married and everything like that. And, he's marrying Matthew Weiner's mom. Good for him. But there's a little bit of weirdness of like why Matthew Weiner would write it that way, but whatever. I guess there is some stuff there about how Matthew Weiner, this era is like when his parents were like, this was like the right era for that sort of thing. And we'll get into that later, because there's some family stuff with him coming up.
Calm down, Sigmund Freud.
Hey, yeah, he invoked it. Okay, so then Don goes to have a drink with Rachel Menken. I love this scene. I think this is my favorite scene in the pilots. What do you guys think?
Sorry, no, I was all about nipple tassels the scene before. It didn't recover.
Yeah, you needed time after that whole scene, huh?
Yeah, it's the way. No, it's so good. Besides the fact that it made me want a Mai Tai, because you've seen Don's rapport with her before. You've seen Don's rapport with another woman, but then you see this back and forth, and you're realizing, wow, like Don's kind of really meeting his match here. His ego has been a little bit more humbled. She's not putting up with it, and I think she becomes the more interesting character for Don to discuss and develop with than anybody you've seen in the pilot thus far.
Especially compared to Midge, right? Because Midge is just sort of like unbuttoning her shirt, and she's like, I don't care, free spirit. Whereas Rachel is sort of like, challenging his worldview, making him sort of like glimpse a different side of himself that he wasn't aware of, maybe.
Literally buttoned down, equal to him in that respect.
Well done. Yeah, and I think my favorite thing about this is, when he's talking about, that disconnect of like happiness is something that I sell. where before he's saying like, what do people want more than happiness? More happiness. It's just such a great like parallel to this is how he is with these people. This is how he is when he starts to have his guard down. And it entices you because it makes you wonder, what is he really like? Like, I want to see this character fully his guard down. And that's something that I kind of wanted to mention too, is like something that Mad Men gets right from the get-go is how guttural this show is. There's so much texture and like human like roughness to it. Maybe roughness isn't the best word, but like people, there's sweat. There is like, especially like when, Don wakes up in the morning with Midge, like his hair is all messed up. There's a little bit of like, he makes sounds, like a little bit of like the smoke causes like, I think they did like herbal cigarettes without nicotine throughout the show, but it still like affects their voices.
Yeah, I mean, certainly for Jon Hamm, because I read that I think he quit smoking cigarettes after college. So all of his cigarettes in the show are herbal fake cigarettes, kind of similar to what they did with Stand By Me, where it's like the cabbage cigarettes for the kids or whatever. So yeah.
I'm more partial to candy cigarettes myself, like
Sure.
Community,
Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's something that I do appreciate Mad Men for quite a lot, is all that stuff. And the smoking as a motif is always like, kind of interesting. Not a lot of shows have that effect because they can't really get away with it, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, certainly at that time. But I mean, that kind of goes back to the title of the show, like Smoke in Your Eye, or Smoke Gets in Your Eye, where this idea of like the 50s and the 60s, people sort of idealize it and nostalgize it. And the show itself sort of leans into that as well. Like they are nostalgizing the era, but they're also acknowledging a lot of the hypocrisy, the sexism, the racism of the time, the idea of like how you could, if you lived in that era, literally have like the smoke in your eye, not only from the cigarettes, but like indulging in that by living vicariously through these characters and being in Don Draper's shoes. Like it doesn't like sympathize with his character or like say that he's right or wrong, but you can understand where he's coming from. And in that respect, you are literally getting the smoke in your eye,
Okay, well put. All right, so then the next scene is when Pete throws himself at Peggy. And I love this character surprise because I remember when I first saw it, I was like, I did not see it coming at all, that Peggy would actually accept his advances. But that, again, is what this show does so well. It surprises you with the characters. The characters continuously do things you don't expect, but they do make sense for the character. Peggy got turned down earlier, and now she finds herself sort of like this man kind of dressing himself down, being super vulnerable and pathetic is something that she's kind of into. She's kind of into this version of Pete Campbell. And I do think it's super fascinating, especially as the series progresses. And she decides that she wants to take him into her room. I feel bad for Marjorie because she knows what's going on. Like there's no way that apartment seems kind of small, but there is that. But yeah, did you guys have a similar reaction to this scene or any criticism?
Yeah, you don't like Pete, right? The pilot does not make you like Pete. And so it really makes you be like, Peggy, no, why? I also like that it shows that Pete's not listening to Don. Like he's not listening. He's not learning. He is so stuck in himself in his own ways. He got in his own way during the meeting, and now he's getting into his own way and his self-loathing with Peggy, right? And that's why he's never going to beat Don.
Agreed. He knows he will never be Don. I think this episode gets that across, is that like that's his realization. It's like, I'm just not that guy. Like I don't have that smoothness. I don't have that appeal. So he desperately just tries a different tactic. He tries to just be utterly pathetic and desperate, and it works for him. But again, yeah, it's like you said, it's kind of interesting that the show goes that route. It's like this guy gets the girl in the end. It's kind of weird.
Yeah, I mean, the only thing I wanted to add outside like the obvious stuff is that I really like how the scene is directed, and that Alan Taylor is able to have a pretty clear-eyed view of what's going on, but at the same time get us into the mindset of both characters. I mean, from what we know about Peggy and Pete about the scene, like we kind of understand their perspectives going into it, but the way the scene is framed and directed, we also get like what's going on, but at the same time we understand the intimacy of it and the kind of weird unsettlingness at the same time. I think is really well effectively communicated. And also I just want to say that as much as Pete the character sucks, I think Vincent Cassell, or what's the actor's name?
Kartheiser.
Am I getting that? Sorry, Vincent Kartheiser. I think for as scummy as that character is, I think that performance is really great, even going back to this pilot. And I know that he as an actor has been kind of hard to work with, but I also think he's pretty perfectly cast as his character at the same time.
Absolutely. And that is the pilot. Wait, is Don on a train? What's going on? He's going somewhere. Ozening, where's that? What? He has a house and a wife and 2 kids? So yeah, we get to the pilot twist. I guess if you can call it a twist. Again, some people say it's pretty predictable, but I love this. I think that it firmly like establishes, it affirms like exactly what the show is, which is Don like literally being another version of himself. He's shown so many identities in this, it's ridiculous. And he goes, of course, and he's kind of trying to, you could tell he's kind of weird and uncomfortable around his own kids even. Like he's just kind of like staring at them and just being like, I don't care about you almost. He's been gone a whole, night. And that's the thing is like, he hasn't said a word about his wife or his kids the entire time we've seen him in this pilot episode. I think this is terrific. And it is interesting that, January Jones just kind of shows up and it's just like, I'm here. And, I do know that they had to sort of like give her more lines than the original script had because she was concerned that her character would not be like, important enough. And I wouldn't blame her based on how she kind of gets, short shrift in this. But of course, we'll be getting much more January Jones later on.
I mean, the only thing I was just going to say is that something I took extra notice this time is that Don as a character doesn't even have like a photo of his kids, so far as I can see, in his office, which adds to kind of the coldness and the reserve of it and how like he literally needs to take a train to go to his house. There's like this idea that he's literally living basically 2 lives, which also adds to the parallel nature of his reality where he's like him as a character has to accept this idea where he is concocting his life for himself. And even when he goes back to his home life, that's not really real to him because he's barely spending time with his wife and his kids. So yeah, really effective stuff.
Yeah, I was really struck with this time through. I remember the first time I always thought the whole thing was Midge was the girlfriend, and the big thing was that there was going to be an affair with the Menkins girl, and that was going to be the big struggle. So I was really surprised when he went home, and he did have a wife and kids. But this time through, I was really struck about, he didn't have the picture of his kids in his office, but the fact that he takes the time to go into the room, I think speaks a lot. And it really hit me of like, okay, Don does love his kids, but I think it scares him. The humanity, the idea that he is a father, it connects him to this world in a way that he does not want to be connected. And on the second time watch through, I'm excited to kind of watch how that plays out through the series, but it's something I definitely noticed this time.
The only other thing I was going to add is that I think it would have been easy for the show to make the relationship between Betty and Don kind of cold. But one thing I really appreciate about the pilot and the scene with them is that it is kind of erotic. Like they're going to be like, they're pretty clear. It's like, yeah, we're going to have sex, and Don doesn't feel like robotic about it. He's like, yeah, I want to have sex with my wife because he's a horny dude. So I think that also kind of adds to complexity of Don as a character and something I really appreciate watching the pilot again. But that's the only thing I wanted to add.
Totally. Yeah. And that obvious hypocritical, nature of how he kind of acts above it all, but he's cheating on his wife. He's cheating on his girlfriend. He's going to be cheating on his other girlfriend. Yeah. It's pretty.
But he's still attracted to his wife. That's the other thing.
Yeah.
I mean, that's just what I find so fascinating.
But that's the thing is like, I feel like this whole conversation has been a lot of setup because obviously there's so much more. We got to take these little notes, little mental notes, because there's so much to unpack there in terms of like, okay, how does he really view Betty? How does he view these kids? And I think, the rest of the show is really going to build that out more and more in greater and greater detail. I'm so excited because I think we're really going to get into some good stuff here. And so my first as we wrap this up question I want to start with you, Mike. You've already alluded a lot to sort of like, this was interesting how like coming back from the show, but I guess my question for you though, like for like what's next, is after this episode ended, were you like ready to watch more? Did you feel like, I wish I could watch the next episode, or are you kind of like savoring a little bit of like, I'm into it, but I'm not like in that binge mode yet?
No, I absolutely am ready for more. I finished episode 1. I watched it. So I'm doing the rewatch on my own just because it's a lot easier to schedule. My girlfriend has never seen Mad Men. And I got done with episode 1 and all I could think about was like, I got to watch this again with Hannah. It's such a good show. Everybody needs to watch this. If you haven't seen it, watch it. So it got me excited again.
Awesome. Same question for you, Will.
Yeah, I mean, the weird thing for me is that I remember watching the first season in a time span where it was probably within 2 or 3 weeks, but I remember taking the time to really reflect on the show and think about it because I don't know if it was because I was a teenager, because TV wasn't so prevalent in my life where I was like, I'm watching and binging all these shows all the time. But I was expecting to have a similar experience with the pilot. And it felt for me like the thing that surprised me most rewatching is like, I really want to watch the second episode now. I thought it would be more like, oh, I want to sit and reflect on this. I was like, no, actually, if I had the time and the availability outside of this podcast, I'd probably watch 2 or 3 more episodes because it's a really effective pilot and I want to know more about Dawn again. So yeah, that is a credit to the show.
Yeah. But the good thing is we will be taking our time. And the good thing about that is that we will be sitting with these and having great conversations, I hope. And I think this is going to be a great first season of Mad Men. We're still figuring out the kinks to this, but this has been a lot of fun. This has been very insightful. Thank you for hearing me out on my random criticisms, which were certainly, some of them probably went a little bit too far. But yeah, I guess that is, I don't know how to end this. I don't know how to, do we just shut the door and have a seat? That is a reference, Will, of the 3rd season. Oh yeah,
okay. I was
Mike
going to say,
play a game.
Oh
yeah,
yeah,
I thought we could do the Mad Men Minute. John, you're in advertising,
Mad Men Minute?
so there's no better person to judge it. You give us a product. We have a minute to pitch it. Whoever has the best idea wins.
But should I do it? I'm the host, right? So, okay, fine. I'll do it.
This could be a Whose Line Is It Anyway.
I feel like you want to.
Where it's like
you want to do the
rotates.
tagline, don't
It
you?
rotates. Maybe everybody plays, everybody judges. There's a lot of episodes.
That's fine. Okay. Yeah, we can have fun with it. All right. Well, here's the product. This is going to be a direct reference to something in the episode because why not? The product is the movie Bambi. What's your tagline, Will? Oh yeah, we get a minute.
Oh yeah, I was gonna say, do I get some time to think about this for a minute, or do I have to go instantaneous?
John,
tagline?
how is Bambi made?
Well, Mike, when 2 deer love each other very much out in the forest, and also you cannot use a tagline "Book of the Century."
I have mine. Ding ding.
That one's taken. Go ahead, Mike.
Bambi, his or her, I can't remember what gender Bambi is. Mom got toasted.
His mom got toasted. Bambi's a boy. All right. Do you have one, Will?
I'm trying to remember because I know Bambi was like the biggest movie of that year, but I didn't know if that was like because of the buzz afterwards or if it was because of like the build up before it, like with the book. So I was trying to remember exactly, but
Bambi, I thought was the 1950s.
I was trying to think of something like,
I'm checking right now.
Was it the 1950s?
I thought so, but I could be wrong. Maybe
I thought
was
it was
1940s,
60s, but I could be wrong.
1942.
Oh, well, man, I was way off then.
Yeah, you're a whole generation away.
Right,
I was probably thinking
exactly,
of Alice in Wonderland. That was 50s.
Yeah. Well, when was Snow White?
Snow White was 38. That's the first one.
38. Okay.
Yeah, Cinderella's 50,
Yeah.
and Sleeping Beauty's. I think Sleeping Beauty is 60s. But no, you're stalling, Will Ashton. What is your tagline?
Mm-hmm. I was gonna say something like Bambi, see a life anew.
See a
very
life
vague.
anew? Wait, what?
Yeah,
See it.
because you're seeing wildlife and you're seeing animals as you've never seen them before. If you're in the 1940s,
that's not a tagline. That's just words.
Bambi, see a life anew.
There's so many vowels in that. You think it's a Wordle guess.
Yeah, we have to.
Yeah.
That's your first Wordle guess, huh? Well, we're gonna have to, Mike. I think we have to work on Will's advertising.
Maybe I'll
chops.
get better at advertising as this show goes
That's the
along.
pitch of the show.
He
Like,
hasn't
the
seen as
pilot.
much as
Talk about
us.
Mad
That's
Men.
fair.
Yeah, you're right. We're going to talk
I'm a
about
regular
advertising at the
Pete.
end of every episode, and Will's going to get so
Yeah.
smart.
I'm a Pete, I'm an ingenue to this, so maybe I'll get better or worse.
You're
as it
to
goes
show
along.
up
I
with
know
like a
what happens
binder
with
full of
Pete.
research.
We're going to land Will
Yeah,
a job at
exactly,
the end
yeah.
of this. This is just going to go straight onto his LinkedIn.
I don't have a good one. I wasn't really thinking, but I'll say I don't know. Yes, dear. There you
Oh,
go. That's a
dear.
tagline. Yeah, that works too. John, dear. That's my name. All right. That is Mad Men. We'll be back to talk about the second episode. I forget what the second episode's called. No, Marriage of Figaro is the third episode.
It's like
but
the ladies' room or
forget-
something.
Yeah.
Something to do with the women. Women's
that what it
closet,
is?
water closet.
Oh, I have it right here. I'm gonna bring it up right now. Ladies' room. You were right. Good job. And we also did mention that this came out July 19, 2007. And the show dates it as taking place in March. So there you go. Even though Enovid, I'm pretty sure the birth control pill wasn't approved by the FDA until June 1960, which I only know because I read about that. Okay.
You know a lot
That's
about policing women's bodies, John.
It's the only thing I know about. No, please redact that from the record.